Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Bear Down Ballers right here on the Field of 68 Media Network. I'm Ryan Wall, joined as always by Jordan Pollock. And Jordan, Arizona moved to 19 and 10 on the season. It's their first time since the 2019-2020 season that they've suffered 10 defeats in one single season. And they right now they're in third place in the Big 12 and the wheels are starting to fall off. Arizona is 2 and 4 in their last 6 games, lost to 3 unranked teams during that span, and they're coming off of a big 17-point loss against Iowa State this past Saturday. We'll get into all that, but first, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. It's super cloudy here in Arizona. The weather's starting to change a little bit, which is interesting. You're getting into some I can't remember what you call it. It's blanking my head, but just crazy
Spring.
weather out here. Yeah, rocking some New Mexico. Got some close family friends out there. Richard Pitino's doing a great job with them, and we're in March, man. I'm so happy.
Yeah, well, March is finally here. We've already got some madness to start off the month. And yeah, this should be a great month. And let's just get right into what Arizona did this week. So they started the week off with a win earlier in the week against Utah, 83 to 66. Arizona won, had 4 players in double figures. Caleb Love led the team, 23.7 assists. Another efficient game, back-to-back games where he shot the ball terrific, 6 for 12 from three. He was really great in this one, and Arizona was up by 14 at half. This game was starting to get out of hand as we got into the second half. What were some thoughts you had from this one?
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised. I thought Utah would put up a little bit better of a fight, but with the context of them firing their coach just in the last 2 weeks, I think that I think changed things a little bit and just going into a really tough environment in McHale, and especially when Arizona's best players kind of firing on all cylinders, it's hard to win in that kind of context.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Utah just from the beginning of this game, they couldn't get going offensively. 33% from the field, 26% from deep. Arizona won the rebounding battle like they do a lot of times, 45 to 39. Big there that they got that done. And Jaden Bradley also bounced back with 12 points himself. He had a couple down games as we talked about. Overall, I think this was a really good win. It was a good bounce back performance as Arizona has they obviously they needed a win like this to get things back on track. And Jordan, let's get into it because later in the week, Arizona on Saturday lost to Iowa State, as I mentioned, by 17 points. They were losing this game. It seemed like before you even knew it, they were down by 20 to start the second half. And Arizona just really struggled in this matchup. Caleb Love will get the headlines, obviously, as he normally does. 2 for 15 from the field, 2 for 10 from three. And but it wasn't just a him problem. Dalorso had 0 points. Awaka had 4 points, and just nobody really could get going. And as poorly as Utah shot the ball, Arizona even topped them in this one. Arizona was 18% from three, 4 for 22 there, 33% from the field. We talk about it all the time. If you're going to come out shooting like that, you have very little chance to beat anybody at this level.
Yeah, I agree. I think the biggest thing from the tip off was just Iowa State's aggression on the defensive end. They were doubling and they were doubling hard off ball screens, and that just really affected Arizona in some really bad ways. They got some Iowa State got some great traps on the sideline, and that led to a bunch of turnovers. And that was just I think the biggest part of the game was just how aggressive Iowa State was. And there were definitely points where I was thinking, well, like if you're gonna let them hack every single double, then there's still a certain limit to where it's like not really much you can do besides just try to shoot them out of that. And how good Arizona's been of getting the ball to the middle of the court, and Iowa State just forced them to the sideline the entire game, And up until like the late second half when they had a good run, they just could not shake the aggression that Iowa State gave them defensively.
Yeah, Iowa State, we talked it last week if they were going to have Gilbert and Jones. They had Gilbert and Jones in this one. Jones came off the bench actually in this game, but yeah, Iowa State had five players in double figures. That did not include Gilbert, who only had 6 points. Arizona played him well, but everyone else was just shooting the lights off out of the ball. I mean, they were 11 for 21, over 52% from deep in this game. Arizona just couldn't guard them from deep and at that. And yeah, it just seemed like when when Iowa State's lead continued to grow is when Arizona's bad shot attempts continued to grow and increase, and guys like Caleb Love were just kind of taking horrible shots, and it just seemed like from the start to the end of this game, Arizona just they didn't seem prepared. They didn't seem like they were like they had their best stuff, and they just couldn't get anything going or clicking on offense. What do you think this win set or this loss says for this Arizona team? Because as I mentioned from the start, Arizona has lost four of the last six games. And, we mentioned they beat Utah and Baylor, who are unranked teams, but, some like the other losses when they lost to Houston and Iowa State, two of the top five teams in the Big 12, they just came up short. So do you think this has proved that Arizona, they had a good run in November, December, January, but they're just not in that group with Houston and Iowa State at the top?
Yeah, that's exactly what I think, and I think the game kind of showed it. And I think Iowa State and Houston are very similar in the way that their culture is replicated with how they play, if that makes sense. And not to say anything bad about Tommy Lloyd, he's instilled a great culture. He's shifted the rosters really well, but I still think there's at least somewhat of a gap on both sides of the court how Arizona plays to where their culture is, to where Houston and Iowa State, they're aggressive defensively. They're going to get in your face. They're going to cause turnovers. They're going to use that to open things up, but their identity is in their defense, and
Yep.
and they're not putting guys on the floor that are, say, like handicapped or get targets on their back. And I know we've talked a lot about specifically Trey Townsend and Anthony Del Orso, and though I think those guys have improved, but I do still think that's a pretty big gap in those guys and the rest of the core role players, to where it's hard if you're trying to figure out how to get them on the court, because a guy like Anthony Del Orso, offensively, I think he's very much needed at a lot of stretches for this team with how he can shoot the ball and just shot create in general. And I feel like Caleb Love is really the only other guy on the court that is like him in that way. And it's just hard to get him on the court because you don't know from night to night what you're going to get from him defensively and how the other team is going to try to attack his matchups offensively.
Yeah, I love the comparison between Iowa State and Houston that you just made because I totally agree. I view those teams similarly, and that's because they have players that it seems like they all are just bought into what Iowa State wants to do, and that's play defense, that's score in the paint, and that's when you have open shots, take them, but be selective. And yes, Iowa State's only about a 35% team from deep normally, but yeah, if you look at it, none of their players, a lot of games aren't, 0 for 4, 1 for 7. Their guys know that when they're not hitting their shots, they find other ways to impact the game. And I just think it does take time because Iowa State does have a lot of players who have been in that program for a while. And Tommy has kind of had to rework this roster the last couple years on the fly. But still, like you mentioned with Del Orso, and same goes true for Townsend, is you have guys that are just unplayable in certain stretches in certain games against different opponents, and that just makes it so much harder to compete every night when you have guys that just aren't that versatile and they can't play different styles. And that to me is the biggest weakness of this Arizona team is they don't have players that are great enough in different areas, and also this team just isn't a great defensive team. And I think that Tommy going into next year needs to make it a priority about making not even a defensive first mindset, but just getting guys that are willing to give a better effort on a nightly basis on defense.
Yeah, definitely. Like, and along with like Del Orso, when you have stretches when you can't play him, that puts even more stress on Caleb Love to produce. And so that leads to him taking the shots with a hand in his face as opposed to taking more higher efficient shots and driving it in to where a lot more of the offensive load is on his shoulders. And that's when his efficiency, no matter how good or great it is, like your game is dependent on whether he can
Yep.
put the ball in the bucket every two possessions or not. And that's just I think simply where this team really struggles right now. And I think at the start of the year they really emphasized like we want to be able to win without Caleb Love, and it didn't work to a sense, and even that kind of game plan was super matchup dependent to where now it seems like depending on the matchup they really don't have a choice whether they have to keep Caleb Love on the floor and they have to let him try to help start the offense or him be the offense, and that just doesn't leave this team in a very favorable position, I think, going forward, playing against better and more elite teams like we saw with Iowa State.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, Jordan, because everybody can talk about Caleb Love, about his weaknesses, about his poor performances. You can talk about that. But when you talk about that, on the other hand, you do have to mention that, along with the sentiment as you're just saying, is that Caleb Love's the only consistent player that is willing to just attempt a lot of shots on this team. Because obviously Bradley did have 14 attempts from the field in this game, but the prior four games he barely would even shoot the ball, or he barely would even do anything on offense. So
Yep.
when you look at the other players, like I mentioned, you have Toby Awaka, Del Orso, you have two players on offense that started this basketball game that did that, you know. Or Awaka obviously did make one field goal, but they both had three or under, and you put that along when you have Townsend and Bryan and Martinez who played in this game, who just provided very little and just aren't willing to shoot at that rate that you need on the floor, and you're just not going to win basketball games when you get down early and then you're relying on one player. And if that one player doesn't, shoot the lights out of the ball, like don't forget, I don't want anyone to forget, Caleb Love is coming off of two spectacular performances. People won't mention that because they only focus on the negative stuff with Caleb Love. But when you have that, he's not going to be able to shoot 50% from the field every single night. He's not a high percentage shooter in the majority of games, but he's the only high volume shooter on this entire team. And if Caleb Love if he took half the shots, this team would lose by 30 points in a game like this because no one else is willing to take threes. Nobody else is willing to, everyone else kind of just passes up shots after shots on this offense. And we said it multiple times, but yeah, I just don't think this team has what it takes on offense or defense. But in particular, what we're talking about now, we're focused on the offense. They just don't have a good enough offense to compete with a team like Iowa State or a team like Houston.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think one thing to be said, and I think especially hard, is it felt like when they were clicking, it was spread out a lot more. And mind, like we've been kind of crapping on Anthony Del Orso and Trey Townsend, but also I think some of the offensive ability that KJ Lewis and Carter Bryant have coming off the bench and their volume, I don't feel like their volume has been very high at all lately. And it felt like when they've went on these big stretches of great games, those guys have just helped in so many great ways and were super high efficient at their low volume. And I think games like this, like I feel like you just need those guys, their volume to be higher. And I know Carter Bryant's been slipping on a lot of mock drafts. I think because of that, because his volume is almost so low that pretty much all of his big shots are a three in the last minute or 2 minutes of a big regulation game or overtime game, like against Arizona State and Iowa State. So I think the younger guys, I think, need to step up offensively too.
For sure. And a guy who he in KJ Lewis, who did have 13 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 blocks. I thought he overall had a good game, and he's had a I think he's had a good season, and he's done a good job of being one of the only guys who, even if he's not on offensively, can affect the games in other ways. But the last 4 games, he's had these are his field goal attempts: 4, 7, 8, 9, under 10 in 4 straight games. The 3 games prior, he had 10 or more. But most of the season, if you look at it, he's had under 10. But when he does have 10 or more, he is a more, productive player. And that's why I kind of pushed back when earlier in the year they moved KJ Lewis back to the bench. And I get he has produced from the bench, but it's like, why is he only playing 25 minutes? And I get this game did get out of hand in the second, but why is he only playing 25 minutes coming off the bench when he is one of your most productive players? Well, he should be a starter. He should start over Anthony Del Orso. It's just that simple. You could tell me all the things about he still plays a lot of minutes. It doesn't matter who starts, it matters who ends. But I don't care about that right now. He's one of your best 5 players, and he's even one of your offensively, he's one of your best 3 players on a night-to-night basis. He should be starting. I just don't get this. I don't get this thing that Del Orso is starting. It did take Tommy a little more time to remove Townsend from the starting lineup, so maybe it's just it'll take a little time, but to me, he needs to be playing 30 plus minutes when you get into the Big 12 tournament, when you get into March Madness. But Jordan, any other takeaways you had from this Iowa State game?
Yeah, I think it just reflects how much I think the almost the roster building, it just seems at times so different compared to Tommy and Kelvin Sampson and TJ Otzelberger, to where I feel like there's so many guys on this Arizona team. It's like, okay, well, we need some offense. We need to put this guy in the game. Okay, now we need defense. We need to put this guy in the game. Where Houston and Iowa State, that's not the way those programs are. Like everybody on the floor can play defensively, and they can all like know their roles offensively, and I think that that's just such a big difference that I think that those two teams, that the all the 3 programs have, and I think Arizona, with how elite they are and how big in names they can get recruiting, I just don't understand the disconnect, how that's been hard for them to figure out.
Yeah, well, Jordan, on that, let's move on and talk about Arizona's next game. They have the Sun Devils from Arizona State coming to town Tuesday night. It's taking place at McCall Center. Tip-offs at 9 p.m. local time, 11 p.m. on the East Coast. It's on ESPN. Obviously, Arizona did win by 11 or won by 9 points back in February, earlier last month in Tempe, but now it switches locations to Tucson. Arizona has won 9 of the last 10 matchups against ASU, and ASU did win that lone one matchup at the McCall Center a couple years ago. As we know, ASU, since they played Arizona, they've lost 7 of 8 games, and they've just kind of struggled a lot as Arizona has, but to a whole different level. What do
Yeah.
you think about this game? And you think Arizona can win this game and get back in the win column?
Yeah, I think it's a big game for Arizona, because I think on paper and really even on the court, I think the last time they played, I think Arizona just makes so many more winning plays and plays so much more consistently than Arizona State does. But with that being said, having Bobby Hurley on the sideline, he will try to make this thing about more than just the game, and there will likely be drama in this game. And so I think it'll probably be closer than I think it will. But I do think Arizona will get a win, and I'm excited to see another rendition of what Bobby Hurley has to say, possibly about Caleb Love.
Yeah, well, I think Bobby Hurley's time is coming to an end in Tempe, and this could be the final game that he plays against Arizona. Very likely that's the case. A guy that I think Arizona needs to be on the lookout for. He scored less than 10 in the last matchup, but Sonan, the former Arizona commit and recruit is really picked it up since he's came back from injury. 18 points, 28 points in his last two. A really good guard, really quick guard. I think Arizona needs to make him a focal point in this one. But overall, like you said, they won by 9 in Tempe. I think they win this game by 12 points. Like I said, I'm not too confident because Arizona themselves isn't playing nearly at a great level or at a level that we want them to play at. But I kind of find this hard to believe Arizona won't come home and put up a big performance against ASU because for some of the guys, like a Caleb Love, this will be the last time he plays ASU. So I think this game will mean a lot to some of the veterans on Arizona's team. But yeah, after that, Arizona does play their final game of the regular season this Saturday. They play the Kansas Jayhawks in or at Kansas. The game will take place at 4:30 on the East Coast. It's on ESPN, a national TV game to close the season. We'll be back before that game later this week to preview it. But Jordan, Arizona only has 2 games left of the regular season. What are your final thoughts as they head in these last 2 matchups?
Yeah, I think they've got a little bit of work. I think as of right now, we're talking about them didn't leave the rankings after the big loss on Saturday at Iowa State. They're ranked right in the late 20 or right in the mid 20s, and so that puts them right at the 5 to 6 to 7 seeding. And so I think right now their floor is probably a 9 seeding, and so I think they've got a little bit of work to keep that 5 to 6 to 7 seeding going forward over the next 2 games and going into the Big 12 tournament.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I don't think Arizona should be ranked right now. They do not look like anywhere near a top 25 team in the country, that's for sure. But Jordan, that's all we have time for today. Thanks everybody for watching, viewing, liking, and subscribing.